Jinnah of Pakistan by Stanley Wolpert. Simla, 1929 to 1930. Jinnah adjourned his faction of the Muslim League after a stormy session that followed the Calcutta Convention debacle. He left Mahmudabad, Chagla, and their youthful allies, and Bengal behind, entertaining for Delhi before the year's end. On New Year's Day of 1929, he entered the All Parties Muslim Conference, presided over by the Aga Khan in the ancient capital of Turco-Afghan sultans and Mughal emperors. Shafi was there with his Punjabi cohort when Jinnah walked into the silken pandal pitched on the parade ground of the Red Fort that Shah Jahan had built. Bearded mullahs and knighted bejeweled princes of Islam sat side by side. Jinnah entered late and sat alone. He was as yet undecided how long he would remain back among his fold, who must have seemed almost as foreign and uncongenial to him as the other, larger crowd from which he had just fled. The radical Ali brothers were there, together with the Nawabs and Rajas from many a Muslim state. Was this really his home? Were these truly his people? It was a vast gathering representative of all shades of Muslim opinion, wrote the Aga Khan, recalling the conference. I can claim to be the parent of its important and lasting political decision. After all, full and frank discussions, we were able to adopt unanimously a series of principles which we set out in the manifesto. The first of these was that the only form of government suitable to the Indian conditions is the federal system, with complete autonomy and residuary powers vested in the constituent states. The next reaffirmed separate Muslim electorates, and others asserted further Muslim weightage demands in provincial and central governments, as well as for civil services. It was not yet Pakistan, but almost its early embryo within a weak federal womb. The League's weighty royal father, driven from the bridge of his communal vessel a decade and a half earlier, was at the helm of Muslim India again. His nationalist mutineer was welcomed effusively abroad. The unanimity of this conference was specially significant, reflected His Highness, for it marked the return, long delayed and for the moment private and with no public avowal of his change of mind, of Mr. M. A. Jinnah to agreement with his fellow Muslims. Mr. Jinnah had attended the Congress Party's meeting in Calcutta shortly before and had come to the conclusion that for him there was no future in Congress or in any camp, allegedly on an all India basis, which was in fact Hindu dominated. We had at last won him over to our view. Well, might the Aga Khan gloat over that victory, though Jinnah did not become his malleable vessel or ever rejoin the Khoja fold. His Highness understood, however, the value of so priceless a prodigal's return. Nor was it the royal we he used in that last sentence. Shafi and Sir Fazle Hussain and others had helped him win Jinnah over to our view. They could not have achieved it without Jayakar's unwitting aid. That there would be no public avowal of his agreement indicates at least Jinnah's ambivalence about joining forces with so conservatively pro-British a team. He had indeed concluded there was no future for him in Congress or any Hindu-dominated political party. Shifting into reverse to keep pace with the Aga Khan and Shafi could hardly be accomplished without first idling, however, in neutral gear. By mid-January, he was back in Bombay. Ruthie was virtually bedridden at the Taj Hotel, going out rarely and then only for short walks with Kanji. Jinnah went to visit her there. He must have known she was near the end. Kanji remained at her side until the assembly budget session started early in February. Jinnah dropped in every evening and talked with both of them, as in the old times. Naively, Kanji believed that they were getting reconciled to each other. But that was even more an illusion than the reconciliation of the Congress and the League had been. Look after my cats and don't give them away, she asked Kanji on February 18th, 1929, being too weak to say any more. 2 days later, on what would have been her 29th birthday, Ruthie Petit Jinnah died. Charnan Lal was chanting with Jinnah in his Western Court apartment in New Delhi when a trunk call was put through to him from Bombay. He spoke calmly, saying he would leave that night. He came towards me after the conversation was over and said, Rati is seriously ill. I must leave tonight. And then there was a pause. Do you know, he added, who was that? It was my father in law. This is the first time we have spoken to each other since my marriage. I persuaded him to leave the next morning by the frontier mail as the night train would not get him to Bombay any quicker. I did not know then, but learned only later that Rati was not merely seriously ill, but she was actually dead. The funeral was held at Bombay's Muslim cemetery on February 22nd. Kanji met Jinnah's train at Grant Road station and drove him there, trying to convince him that Ruthie would have liked to be cremated, but she was buried under Muslim rites. It was a painfully slow ritual. Jinnah sat silent through all of its 5 hours. Then, as Ruthie's body was being lowered into the grave, Jinnah, as the nearest relative, was the first to throw the earth on the grave and broke down suddenly and sobbed and wept like a child for minutes together. Chagla was also there, and he too recalled there were actually tears in his eyes, adding, that was the only time when I found Jinnah betraying some shadow of human weakness. By early March, he was back in New Delhi's assembly, responding to Motilal's cut motion on touring expenses for the Viceroy's cabinet, which raised the constitutional question of redress of grievances before granting supplies, and hence opened the door to debate on the Nehru report. The differences between Hindus and Muslims over the report remained unresolved, and therefore the attempt of making an agreed constitution for India has become a dead issue. Jinnah rejoined. Motilal tried his best to elude that objection, but Jinnah drove home his point, hammering tight the lid over the report's coffin. I know the Nehru report is my honorable friend's pet child, but I am speaking dispassionately and I want him to realize, and the sooner he realizes, the better, that it is not acceptable to the Muslims. Jinnah decided to prove to Motilal, Jayakar, and the rest that he spoke, in fact, for more than a small minority, but that was not an easy task. His own faction of Muslim League remained riddled with dissension. He reconvened the adjourned session of his league in Old Delhi on March 30th, 1929, and had met with some of his rivals till the early hours of the morning, the night before, trying to hammer out a new platform on which all of them could stand. The formula he produced, which came to be known as the 14 points of Mr. Jinnah, was opposed by Dr. Ansari, Tasadduq Ahmad Khan Sherwani, Dr. Muhammad Alam, and Dr. Sayyid Mahmud, all of whom favored supporting the Nehru report. Maulana Muhammad Ali, however, totally disenchanted with Gandhi, supported Jinnah wholeheartedly that evening, paying glowing tributes to his unique feat of statesmanship and, in a lighter vein, calling him the arch compromiser. Jinnah was now trying to achieve the India's Muslims what he had accomplished in 1916 with the entire nationalist movement. He took the Aga Khan's 4 principles, patched them together with his Delhi Muslims proposals of 1927, hammered a few more planks onto either end, and hoped it would float, an ark in which all of them might survive the coming flood. Asif Ali and Dr. Saifullah Kichlu joined. believing it to be the best solution under the circumstances. But there was no enthusiasm for his makeshift craft, little chance that those 14 points would survive the first rough squalls of any storm ravaged sea. Nor could his coalition hold together even for one day. Next morning, the League was to have met at the Roshan Theatre near Ajmer Gate in Old Delhi. Jinnah was to have opened the meeting at 10:30 a.m. but arrived late, doubtless exhausted after the long night of bickering. Dr. Ansari's supporters were in the front rows and Dr. Alam forcibly occupied the presidential chair. He presented a resolution approving the Nehru report and called upon Tasadduq Ahmad Khan Sherwani to second it. The gathering, however, did not allow Dr. Alam to conduct the proceedings. Maulana Muhammad Ali demanded that he should vacate the chair. As Dr. Alam refused, the audience rushed towards the platform and a general melee followed. Just then, Jinnah arrived and his appearance seemed to have some sobering effect. But gauging the futility of the enterprise on which he had embarked, he immediately adjourned the session without attempting to move his 14 points. Had the audience awaiting him been less hostile, he had intended to introduce his many-pointed platform by admonishing them that if the will of the Muslim India was to be registered, then it can only be accomplished by a united decision. No one was in the mood to listen. The Jinnah League had, in fact, ceased to exist. Its last few meetings adjourned either for lack of quorum or because of wild behavior. The rest of Muslim India was either within Congress, where Maulana Abul Kalam Azad remained, or impotently divided into smaller and smaller parties, none of which attained more than provincial status. Shah's League remained a force in the Punjab. Dr. Ansari convinced Asif Ali Arid Chaudhry Zama to help him start a new nationalist Muslim party that was influential in the United Provinces. The Aga Khan founded his own All India Muslim Conference, a continuing seminar of conservatives eagle as Sir Fazle Hussain, Sir Shafat Ahmad Khan, and the Nawab of Chatari. It was less than 3 months since the All Parties Muslim Conference, and they were all running again, in different directions. How realistic were Jinnah's prospects of pulling them back together? Except for a few personal friends such as Malik Barkat Ali, Abdul Mateen Chaudhry, and Sir Muhammad Yaqub, his loyal helper in running the league, Sayyid Shamsul Hassan, rightly noted that others were reluctant to work with the Qaid. His strict attachment to the principles and independent approach to problems were the main reasons which kept the others away from him. Jinnah had no place left to turn but to his British friends. The political climate in London was rapidly liberalizing, and his old Islington Commission colleagues, Ramsay MacDonald, was about to become Westminster's new pole star. That May, the Tory government fell, and the Prime Minister MacDonald appointed his Labour colleague William Wedgwood Benn, 1877 to 1981, later Viscount Stanegate, Secretary of State for India. Jinnah wasted no time travelling to Simla as soon as he learned of the Labour victory for a long personal talk with Lord Irwin. The Viceroy would be returning to London in a few weeks to meet with his new chiefs at Whitehall and 10 Downing Street. Jinnah urged him to press for a strong declaration by the Home Government that the Dominion status was the goal of British policy for India, suggesting a round-table conference in London to draft such a constitution. But the present system was again coming under heavy siege. Gandhi had returned to Congress's centre stage during its final hours in Calcutta to prepare to mount a new national Satyagraha campaign if Parliament failed to implement the Nehru report within the calendar year of 1929. The Mahatma moved the Congress resolution accepting Motilal's report for 1 year only in order to avert a fight between the forces of Motilal and Jawaharlal on the Congress floor over whether the national goal should be dominion status or complete independence. This Congress will adopt the Nehru Report Constitution in its entirety if it is accepted by the British Parliament on or before December 31st, 1929, that resolution stated. But in the event of its non-acceptance by the date or its earlier rejection, Congress will organize a non-violent non-cooperation by advising the country to refuse taxation and in such other manner as is settled. Despite the sanctity of that resolution's mover, Subhas Bose proposed an amendment calling for complete independence without further delay. "What is the fundamental cause of our political degradation?" cried Bose, the future Indian National Army's Netaji, leader, and later twice Congress president. "It is the slave mentality. If you want to overcome this slave mentality, you will do so only by inspiring our countrymen with a desire for complete independence." He was cheered wildly. Young India was ready to shed its blood for freedom. The darkest days of 1922 were by now forgotten. On June 19, 1929, Jinnah wrote to Ramsay MacDonald, his old friend and new Prime Minister, "The present position is a very serious deadlock, and if allowed to continue, it will, in my judgment, prove disastrous both to the interests of India and Great Britain." He then briefly outlined political events of the preceding few years, especially since the appointment of the Simon Commission and the futility of awaiting its report. "Since so as far India is concerned, we have done with it. Nothing that India has lost her faith in the word of Great Britain." Jinnah advised, "The first and foremost thing that I would ask you to consider is how best to restore that faith and revive the confidence of India in the bona fides of Great Britain." He warned that there is a section in India that has already declared in favor of complete independence, and I may tell you without exaggeration that the movement for independence is gaining ground, as it is supported by the Indian National Congress. To diminish the momentum of such a movement, which Jinnah considered no less dangerous than a threat to India's security than did the Viceroy, he suggested a step 1, a declaration without delay by His Majesty's government that Great Britain is unequivocally pledged to the policy of granting the India full responsible government with dominion status. The effect of such a declaration will be very far-reaching and go a great way to create different atmosphere in the country. As to practical actions to implement such a declaration, he urged his friend to invite representatives of India who would be in position to deliver the goods, because completely unanimous opinion in India is not possible at present, to London to meet the British officials till they could reach a constitutional solution which might carry, to use the words of the Viceroy, the willing assent of political India. The proposals thus formulated could then be placed before the Parliament. Lord Irwin reached London at the same time as Jinnah's letter and went directly to the India office to meet with Wedgwood Ben, suggesting the two ideas of round table conference and formal declaration of dominion status as the goal of British policy for India. The new Secretary of State was disposed to concur, but wished to be satisfied that we were not going behind the backs of Simon and his commission, who were then preparing their report. I accordingly discussed both suggestions with Simon and was much interested in his reaction to them, Irwin recalled. Somewhat to my surprise, he at first saw no objection at all to the declaration about dominion status, but felt difficulty about the round table conference, principally on the ground that it would be likely to affect adversely the status of Commission's report. when it appeared by making this only one among other papers, and the conference would presumably have before it. A little later, again to my surprise, his position changed on both points, and I have always surmised that he was much influenced by Reading. Anyhow, whatever the cause, he finally expressed himself satisfied with the Round Table Conference and fell in with the plan of an exchange of letters with the Prime Minister, by which the conference would appear as an idea put by the Commission to the government and readily accepted by them on the very proper ground of the need to take account of the Indian states as well as British India. So much for historic duplicity seeking to salvage Simon's face. Actual credit for both idea belongs not to Irwin but to his new unacknowledged advisor, Jinnah. Soothing Simon's ruffled feathers took time. It was not until August 14th that Ramsay MacDonald could reply in a private letter. Dear Mr. Jinnah, I am very sorry, but owing to a mistake, your letter of the 19th of June was not put immediately before me. Let me say at once how much I appreciate the spirit in which it was written and how glad I would be to meet it in any way possible. The report of the Simon Commission, you need have no hesitation in assuming, was never intended to be anything more than advice given for the guidance of the government, and that the intention of the government is, as soon as the report is in its hands, to consider it in the light of all the facts. The suggestions which you make in your letter will be pondered over with a desire to use them in every way that circumstances will allow. But one thing I can say here, because I have said it before repeatedly, and it still remains the intention of the government, that we want India to enjoy dominion status. There will probably be announcements made very soon regarding future proceedings. Jinnah was very pleased and optimistically replied on September 7th, if you carry out my suggestion, with which I am glad to find that you are in accord, it will open up a bright future for India, and the name of Great Britain will go down in history as one nation that was true to its declarations. Lord Irving wrote to Jinnah from his Viceroy's camp the following month announcing that His Majesty's government are greatly concerned to find means by which the broad question of British India constitutional advance may be approached in cooperation with all who can speak authoritatively for British Indian opinion. And I am authorized to say that in the judgment of His Majesty's government, it is implicit in the Declaration of 1917 that the natural issue of India's constitutional progress as there contemplated is the attainment of dominion status. In the full realization of this policy, the states must ultimately have their place, and His Majesty's government accordingly proposed to invite representatives of different interests in British India and of the Indian states to meet them, separately or together as circumstances may demand, in regard both to British India and all India problems. They hope thus to be able to submit eventually to the Parliament proposals commanding a wide measure of general assent. The first steps that would lead to 3 major round-table conferences in London were thus taken, and Jinnah was not only the Prime Minister's personal friend and advisor in initiating that complex process, but had now become the Viceroy's key emissary as well. Irwin's historic statement appeared on the front page of every major Indian newspaper on November 1st, 1929. Jinnah was in Bombay that day and met with 18 others in Sir Sir Chimanlal Setawad's chambers to issue a joint public statement in response to Irwin's announcement, welcomed as a fundamental change of procedure whereby the representatives of India will be invited to meet His Majesty's government in conference for the purpose of arriving at the greatest possible measure of agreement regarding the proposals to be submitted to Parliament for the attainment of dominion status by India, and thereby reaching a solution which might carry the willing assent of political India.